The house looked ordinary in the early morning light. A quiet street, trimmed hedges, curtains drawn just enough to suggest life inside. Nothing about it warned of tragedy. Nothing hinted that this was a place where a woman would vanish without a sound. The staircase stood where staircases always do, narrow and familiar, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of use. No one would have looked at it twice. No one ever did. And that was the problem. Emily Satchwell was the kind of person people described as gentle before they described anything else. Gentle smile, gentle voice, gentle presence. She didn't demand attention when she entered a room, but somehow the room felt warmer when she did. She remembered birthdays. She listened when people spoke, really listened, the way that makes you feel seen. To neighbors, she was polite and quiet. To friends, she was loyal and deeply caring. To those who knew her well, Emily carried a quiet sadness she rarely explained. She had routines, like most people do. Morning tea at the same time every day. A habit of straightening small things that didn't need straightening. A way of pausing on the stairs, just for a second, as if gathering her thoughts before going up or down. These details seem small, almost meaningless, until they are all that remains. Emily's marriage had not begun in darkness. There were early years filled with laughter, shared plans, and the hope that comes with believing you have found someone who will stand beside you through anything. But over time, that warmth cooled. Conversations shortened. Silence stretched longer. Control crept in quietly, disguised as concern. Questions about where she was going. Comments about who she spoke to. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have raised alarms. Just enough to make Emily feel smaller, and just enough for others not to notice. People often imagine violence as loud, shouting, slamming doors, bruises that cannot be hidden. But Emily's life taught a different lesson. Some harm happens softly. Some suffering hides behind closed doors and calm faces. Emily learned to keep things to herself. She didn't want to worry anyone. She didn't want to make trouble. She believed, as many do, that things might still get better. Then came the day she disappeared. There was no dramatic scene, no neighbors reporting screams, no shattered glass. Emily simply stopped existing in the way she always had. Her belongings remained. Clothes still hung in the wardrobe. Personal items sat untouched. The house looked lived in, paused midlife, as if she might return at any moment. But she didn't. The explanation offered was vague, confusing, pieces that didn't quite fit together. Stories that shifted just enough to feel uncomfortable, though not enough to provoke immediate action. When people asked questions, answers came calmly, confidently, too confidently, some would later say, but at the time calm was mistaken for truth. In the early days, there was concern, a few worried conversations, a sense that something was wrong, though no one could say exactly what. But concern fades when it isn't fed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Emily's name was mentioned less often. Life moved forward for everyone else, and that is how disappearance truly works. Not all at once, but slowly. A woman is first gone from her home, then from conversations, then from memory. The world does not stop when someone vanishes. It keeps turning, indifferent to who has been left behind. The house remained unchanged, no renovations, no attempts to erase the past. It stood quietly, holding its breath. The staircase stayed exactly as it was, each step still bearing the imprint of Emily's daily life. It was as if the house itself was waiting. Years passed. Emily became a story people spoke about in the past tense, a mystery that felt too old to solve, too uncomfortable to revisit. Some assumed she had left by choice. Others whispered darker possibilities, though never loudly. Silence. The house aged, but it never changed. Seasons passed through its windows, sunlight shifting across the walls, rain darkening the pavement outside. Yet inside, everything stayed suspended in the same quiet moment Emily Satchwell had left behind. Visitors often remarked on how ordinary it felt. Too ordinary, as if nothing significant had ever happened there, as if the walls themselves had learned how to stay silent. People say houses remember. They absorb footsteps, voices, arguments whispered late at night. If that is true, then this house remembered Emily better than anyone else did. It remembered her pauses on the stairs, the careful way she moved through rooms, the silence she learned to keep, and it remembered what happened when that silence became permanent. Mark Satchwell continued his life within those walls with a calm that unsettled some and reassured others. He spoke about Emily in measured tones, without visible emotion, as if grief were a thing that could be organized and stored away like furniture. When asked where she had gone, his answers were steady. She needed space. She was unhappy. She left on her own terms. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together they felt rehearsed, Law enforcement came and went in the early days. They asked questions, noted timelines, made observations that would later feel painfully incomplete. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no broken objects, no neighbors reporting screams. In cases like these, absence is not evidence, and so the house was searched politely, respectfully, quickly. No one lingered. No one pushed where resistance might begin. The staircase was there the entire time, narrow, unremarkable. Its steps led upward and downward like they always had, blending into the background of domestic life. Investigators passed it more than once, their feet touching the same steps Emily had climbed countless times. They did not stop. They did not look closer. They trusted what they could see. Trust became the greatest mistake. As weeks turned into months, the case cooled. Files were shelved. Leads dried up. Emily's disappearance was no longer urgent. It was inconvenient. Without a body, without witnesses, without proof of a crime, the questions softened. Assumptions hardened. People decided what was easiest to believe. Mark's behavior drew quiet attention, but nothing strong enough to change the course of the investigation. He remained composed, polite, cooperative. He never raised his voice, never appeared angry, never demanded sympathy. To many, he looked like a man enduring loss in his own private way. But those who listened carefully noticed small things. How he corrected details without being asked. How he spoke about Emily as if she were already gone forever, long before anyone else had accepted that possibility. How his grief never seemed to evolve, never deepened, never broke through. It stayed flat, controlled, contained. Control had always been part of the relationship. Friends would later remember comments Emily made that seemed insignificant at the time. How she checked in before making plans. How she avoided conflict by staying quiet. How she smiled when she should have spoken. These memories returned slowly, sharpened by hindsight and regret. The house watched it all. It watched the absence settle in. It watched Mark move through rooms alone, his footsteps echoing where Emily's once followed. It watched as dust gathered in corners that had once been cleaned with care. It watched as no one came looking anymore. Years passed. The world outside the house forgot Emily Satchwell. New stories replaced old ones. New tragedies demanded attention. Emily's name survived only in files and memories that grew less certain with time. The case became one of those people spoke about quietly, as if saying her name too loudly might invite discomfort. But time does not erase truth, it only buries it deeper. Mark remained in the house. He changed little. No renovations, no drastic alterations. It was as if disturbing the space might disturb something else, something he preferred to leave untouched. The staircase remained exactly as it had always been, holding its shape, its silence, its secret. Sometimes neighbors noticed lights on late at night. Sometimes they saw Mark standing still for long moments, as if listening to something only he could hear. These observations were never reported. They didn't feel important enough. And that is how evil survives, by never being dramatic enough to demand attention. Emily's disappearance was no longer an active wound. It was a scar people learned not to touch. Yet beneath the calm surface, beneath the dust and the years, the truth remained exactly where it had been left. The house knew, the staircase knew. And one day, the silence that protected them would fail. Because no matter how long the truth waits, it does not disappear, it waits to be found. Time has a way of changing how people listen. What once sounded convincing begins to feel hollow. What once felt settled begins to itch. Years after Emily Satchwell vanished, the silence around her case no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy. The kind of weight that presses down quietly until someone finally asks why it is still there. The case was reopened not because of one dramatic revelation, but because doubt had survived time. New investigators came with fresh eyes and fewer assumptions. They did not know Emily personally. They were not shaped by the early explanations that had softened suspicion. To them, this was not a settled mystery. It was an unfinished one. Old statements were pulled from storage and read again. Slowly this time, dates, times, phrases that had once been accepted without question were now examined for what they avoided saying. The same story told too many times begins to reveal its weak points. Tiny inconsistencies, invisible years ago, began to line up. Mark Satchwell was questioned again. He appeared as he always had, calm, cooperative, composed. But time had changed him, even if he tried to hide it. His answers came a fraction slower. His patience wore thinner. Where there had once been confidence, there was now irritation. Silence, once his shield, began to betray him. Investigators returned to the house with a different purpose. This was no longer a courtesy visit. This was a search guided by suspicion rather than trust. They walked through each room, not asking what was missing, but what had never moved. What had remained untouched for years. The house felt different now, heavier, as if it sensed it was being asked to give something back. Attention shifted to the structure itself. Renovation records were reviewed, timelines were compared. Small changes that had once seemed harmless began to matter. The staircase, overlooked so many times before, became unavoidable. Its placement, its construction, the way it seemed almost deliberately ordinary. Questions grew sharper. Why had certain repairs been made? Why had others never been needed? Why had this space remained unchanged when the rest of life moved on? Mark noticed the shift. He felt the pressure closing in. His calm grew strained. He corrected investigators more often, spoke more than necessary. The careful control he had maintained for years began to crack at the edges. Those around him noticed too. The stillness he once wore comfortably now looked like fear. The house, which had protected him for so long, no longer felt safe. Every question sounded like an accusation. Every pause felt dangerous. For the first time since Emily vanished, the possibility of truth felt real. Investigators prepared to look where no one had dared to before, not because they wanted to believe the worst, but because avoiding it had failed. The house had been given too much trust for too long. Now, it would be treated like any other witness, one that had been silent, but never empty. As the moment approached, tension filled the air. There were no raised voices, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet understanding that whatever was about to be uncovered would change everything. Emily Satchwell had been missing for years, but suddenly she felt close. Not as a memory, not as a question, but as a presence waiting to be acknowledged. The truth was no longer buried in theory or speculation. It was physical, concrete, hidden in plain sight. The staircase stood there, as it always had, unassuming and still. But this time, it was being seen not as part of a house, but as part of a story that had waited long enough. The silence that had protected the truth for years began to fracture. And once it did, there would be no way to put it back together. The moment came without drama, no alarms, no sudden rush, just a quiet decision made after years of avoidance. Investigators stood inside the house, aware that whatever they were about to uncover could never be unseen. The staircase waited, just as it always had, its steps worn smooth by time and indifference. For years, it had been part of the background. Now it was the center of everything. As the structure beneath the stairs was opened, the house seemed to exhale. Dust filled the air. The space that had been sealed away for so long finally revealed what silence had protected. What was found there confirmed what suspicion had whispered but never proven. Emily Satchwell had never left her home. She had been there the entire time, hidden beneath the place people walked past every day without a second thought. There was no shock in the room, only heaviness. This was not a moment for triumph or relief. It was the end of denial. The truth arrived without mercy, carrying years of regret, missed chances, and unanswered questions. Time had not softened the reality, it had only sharpened its cruelty. Mark Satchwell's composure collapsed quickly once the evidence could no longer be ignored. The calm explanations, the steady voice, the carefully maintained silence, none of it survived the weight of truth. The story he had lived inside for years fell apart in hours. Arrest followed, not with chaos, but with inevitability. The past had finally caught up. Justice moved forward, but it did not move gently. Court proceedings laid bare what had been hidden behind closed doors. Details emerged that no one wanted to hear, yet everyone needed to know. The failures of the past became impossible to deny. Questions echoed through the courtroom: how this had been missed, how trust had replaced scrutiny, how a woman could vanish and remain unseen for so long. Emily's name was spoken again, this time without uncertainty, not as a mystery, not as a rumor, but as a person whose life had been taken and whose truth had been buried. Those who remembered her spoke of her kindness, her quiet strength, the way she made people feel heard. For the first time in years, Emily was no longer defined by her disappearance, but by who she had been. There was accountability, but there was no closure. Justice does not return lost years. It does not undo fear or silence or suffering. It only acknowledges what should have been seen sooner. For Emily, it came too late. For those left behind, it came with the bitter knowledge that the signs had always been there. The house no longer felt ordinary after that. The staircase, once invisible, became a symbol of everything people choose not to see. A reminder that evil does not always hide in darkness. Sometimes it lives in plain sight, protected by routine, politeness, and the comfort of assumptions. Emily Satchwell's story is not just about one woman or one crime. It is about silence, how it grows, how it protects the guilty, and how it slowly erases the vulnerable. It is about the danger of believing that calm means innocence, and that time means truth will fade. If this story stays with you, it should. If it unsettles you, it should. Because remembering Emily means refusing to let silence win again. Speaking her name means acknowledging that some truths wait patiently, hoping someone will finally be brave enough to look closer. Emily Satchwell was not forgotten in the end. And because her story is told, shared, and remembered, she never will be.